Hello, School Transportation Nation. It's Tony Corpin and Ryan Gray. We're here with all the great info on the school transportation industry for you this week. Ryan, welcome, sir. Great to see you as usual.
Thank you, Tony, and great to be seen. And of course, as I always say at Nation, I'm always honored to be with you and spend some time with you, talking school buses and school transportation.
Awesome. We're also honored to have our sponsors, TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software, and School Radio, your source for reliable radio communications. Just a little bit, we'll be speaking with Denise Donaldson, the editor and publisher of Safe Ride News Publications. Denise has been a staple at our TSD Conference, always knowledgeable in that area, provides lots of great training, information. She's well known in the industry, right? I mean, we're with Denise for, geez, I don't know. It's got to be at least 20 years.
Well, she goes back to, so when we talk, remind her that I think we first met at TSD Conference, I want to say 2006 or so, 2007. I know she took over Safe Ride News as the editor and publisher in 2007, but I think she came the year before to kind of, start getting her feet wet with the conference. And yeah, like you said, Tony, she's been a mainstay with that every other year. So with her publication, she puts out the Latch manual. That's a huge manual for child safety restraint systems and whatnot. So that's a really big book that she does every other year. So I know last year she wasn't with us, but this year she will be. And Tony, she's also going to be with us in Reno here in a couple weeks for our NHTSA approved 8-hour seminar, child passenger safety on school buses. And she's also doing a session on the top 10 issues with passenger safety in school transportation. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, we'll be talking a little more about that too. We got lots of STN EXPO content for you. Some top headlines. I know, Ryan, we saw on the STNonline.com website that Congress shifts tide in regulatory demands for clean energy. That seems to be an ongoing Congressional Review Act, kind of the CRA, with everything that's happening with the effects on the US EPA and their waivers and CARB. And there's just a lot to unpack there. There's a great headline that we're going to dive into in a little bit. Also, we got the NHTSA rulemaking, talking a little more at the NCST resolutions, focusing on safety. So those are big things as well. And I know there are some topics near and dear to Denise's heart that we wanted to talk about as well, going on out there in the area of special needs. So, I think we got to dive in first. STN EXPO, as you touched on it, we've been having meetings. We're getting ready for the conference sessions. I am hosting a AI panel talking about the future of technology or the promise of AI. Got a great panel lined up for you. We're going to be talking with Gaurav Sharda over at Beacon Mobility. Going to be bringing in Miles Cole from CI Solutions. He's the president there. If you guys have ever used our badges at the show, he helps us make those, and as well does the student ridership cards for most of the operators out there in the software and GPS worlds. So I'm sure love to work with you on a project, as well as he kind of provides a little more of an agnostic view since he's working with everyone, what it really takes to make a successful technology project work. What are some of his key tips and advice? So that was a great element I think we're going to bring forward in the panel. Also, we have Teresa Fleming, who's the Chief Operating Officer for Transportation over at the School District of Philadelphia. Now, she was obviously our Transportation Director of the Year as well and has elevated herself in that operation. And Teresa is going to talk a lot about kind of from a school district perspective, and they are a combined fleet of a contracted fleet and a district-owned fleet, and how they've really kind of grown significantly over time and how they need to elevate their technology stack and really what's important to them, looking at kind of all the operation and trying to move that forward. And she's going into an RFP on multiple technologies. So she's going to talk a little bit about why she's going into that, what are the motivations and what challenges they're trying to solve in the district. So that's very interesting from a district perspective, as well as we have Albert Robert Zamora at Denver Public Schools. He's going to be jumping on as well, talking about what Denver's doing. They have a lot of technology there. So it's always good to get multiple perspectives. So we have a contractor perspective, two school district perspectives, and a kind of an agnostic supplier perspective. So really looking forward to that. That's going to be on Monday. That'd be July 14th. That's right. 14th, yeah. And it's at, I believe, 2:30, 2:20, something around there in the afternoon. So make sure you join me for that great conversation at STN EXPO. If you haven't signed up, you missed the early bird. So we're on the standard rate, but I'm sure keep an eye on your email. You never know. We might send out a special flash code, something for you to save $100 off. Always keep an eye out for emails from us. Always looking to keep you updated on the latest content, information, things like that. And if you do come across an interesting story, something you want to share with us, always reach out to Ryan and I. We always love hearing from you, Nation, about all the great things going on in your operation, good, bad, indifferent. We want to report the news and get it out for everyone so we can learn from it and make our operations better, kids safer, always about student success and safety and operational efficiency. So always key on that. So Ryan, let's talk about some of the key headlines right after this. Hey guys, what do software, hardware, and safety have in common? One word: TransFinder. At the STN EXPO in Reno, TransFinder won 3 Innovation Choice Awards, voted on by STN EXPO attendees for best software, best hardware, best safety technology. TransFinder's Route Finder plus routing solution and apps, Stop Finder and Wayfinder, are well known in the industry. Not everyone realizes TransFinder provides hardware like card readers, tablets, and mounts. And as for safety, Patrol Finder for schools is TransFinder's latest solution designed to make buses and campuses safer. TransFinder's president and CEO, Antonio Civitella, said the recognition means so much because it's voted on by STN EXPO attendees. Civitella said, "We know a lot is riding on TransFinder because a lot is riding on those yellow buses that travel through our communities. TransFinder must continue to innovate as more is being expected of transportation departments from district leadership as well as parents." Learn more at transfinder.com. That's transfinder.com. All right, Ryan, without further ado, what do you got for us? What's happening in the industry?
Well, one of the big headlines nationwide over the last month or so has been the Congressional Review Act that Congress actually passed on May 22nd. Big deal. Now, it had, as of this recording, it had not been signed yet by President Trump. It was expected to be, really targeting California's wide-ranging zero emissions regulations. For this industry, really, targeting the advanced clean trucks regulation, which was essentially putting emissions requirements on manufacturers and telling them, hey, you need to sell a certain amount of zero emissions vehicles, trucks, heavy duty trucks, school buses. And there's 11 or so states that follow the California Air Resources Board. So essentially Congress, we know the Republicans in both the House and the Senate, they have the majority, not a very slim majority, but the majority nonetheless. And one of the controversial aspects of this, Tony, that was really talked a lot about on the news was the Senate parliamentarian said, hey, you can't go after these prior waivers that the federal government, the EPA, gave CARB. So CARB is given, has been traditionally given pretty a wide berth from the EPA in setting its own emissions requirements. And they require waivers. They've been able to get them in the past. They, try to ram in some last minute with the Biden administration. We knew the Trump administration was going to target those, the quote unquote electric mandate, if you will. So the Senate parliamentarian, though, had ruled in the spring, well, no, these are not regulations. These are waivers. So in terms of federal, so you can't usurp those. Well, the Senate and House overruled that. Of course, their opponents on the Democrat side are crying foul on that. Regardless, once Trump signs this, which he said he's expected to, there's going to be a litany of lawsuits. California's already said they're going to sue the federal government to try to reinstate their authority to promulgate these regulations. But like I said, essentially the challenge that we've been talking about, Tony, over the last couple years has been the availability, or one of the challenges has been the availability of the necessary school bus engines and chassis that the industry needs. And with ACT, the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, like I said earlier, it was limiting what manufacturers could have in the marketplace because they needed to hit an increasing amount of the percentage of their sales had to be zero emissions. And with that now seemingly off the table, provides perhaps a little bit of more clarity to the OEMs, although maybe not really, because they've invested so much money in zero emissions technology. Folks I'm talking to say, electric school buses are not going to go away, but I think the push for them and the go electric first and then figure other stuff out later, I think that has switched up. We know with the Clean School Bus program, some of the back channels I've heard is that the program is not going away. Again, this is all, unconfirmed stuff. Things can change, but just some back channel conversations we've had indicate that the program will continue to go on. Again, that's a congressional law, essentially. So it would need to be basically repealed, and it was not part of this CRA that Congress passed. So who's to know what comes in the future again, but Clean School Bus program, it had its money, like we've talked about earlier this year, had a lot of its funding, its money released, at least through the 2023 school year, or 2023, I should say, funding year. And we're awaiting a word on the 2024 rebate that closed actually back in January. Those applications closed. So it should be around this time. Things have been slow, but really seeing that shift and led by Congress. So we have an article up by our Taylor Ekbatani. Congress shifts tide in regulatory demands for clean energy. So you can read more about the impact that the congressional move has on ACT, as well as advanced clean cars too. So that was the requirement here in California that all passenger car, truck, and SUV sales would need to be zero emissions by 2035. Something I've been trying to hold off on. My wife has been wanting an electric car, and I'm like, I don't want to buy one until I have to. But seemingly that one has been shelved. And again, there's a dozen states or so that follow CARB, as well as the omnibus heavy duty low NOx regulations. So, like I said, Tony, a little bit of clarity, but the people I talk to are fully expecting the lawsuits, and I think this thing could be headed to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I just flipped open my June issue of School Transportation News, and we have the article Coming Clean, written by Kara Brzezowski. And Kara really dives into the world of alternative fuels and energy and everything that's happening amongst the debates and operational issues. And now you've got funding. Now you've got federal government getting involved. I mean, there's a lot of headwinds here going on in the space. But I think generally speaking, as an operator, I've spoken to many operators, they're still chugging ahead, right? People are interested, but it does take money to buy these vehicles. And regardless, school transportation operators need to buy buses to transport the kids. And there's a certain amount of replacement cycle that occurs. It just becomes a monetary discussion of, do I go back to clean diesel? Do I go with propane? Do I go with electric, right? And obviously, it's a much bigger capital expense up front with electric. There's other challenges, and people are just like, do I want the headache? Is it worth it? Some people have decided, yeah, it's definitely worth it, and we're committed to that path. Other people that were on the fence maybe saying, I'm leery, this may have tipped the scales in their decision making to go back to what they know, the tried and true diesel solution, or gas, right? There's gas too. And obviously Cummins has their new gas product coming out, which we suspect we're going to start seeing deliveries. Wasn't it announced, Ryan? Was it the end of this year or early next year? Something like that, right?
Yeah. End of, I believe it's next year, 2026. I forget 26. Beginning or end of the year, but it's coming out.
It's a moving target. Well, I mean, Roush has obviously got their gasoline product. They've had it on the Bluebird platform for a long time. They've got the propane solution. So as a single manufacturer, they've got every fuel source, and the other manufacturers are waiting to get access to some of these other fuel sources as an offer, an option. And the sooner it gets out there, the better for them, right? Because it's going to help diversify their offerings as the market shifts, right? We're seeing market shifts, market headwinds, and that is going to affect decision making within school districts. And we'll see what it looks like. I mean, coming up on STN EXPO, we're going to be in front of hundreds, if not over 1,000 school transportation professionals. And we're going to be able to have those conversations and understand where people's heads are at. We have our Green Bus Summit, which, that has evolved over time as well, right? It started out more in propane. We shelved it. We brought it back. Electric really came onto the scene. Everybody was learning, still learning. I think we're kind of out of that early initial, like nobody's shell shocked from it anymore. People have got a little more understanding of it, but we're looking at how do you effectively deploy or implement? What are the lessons learned? There's a lot of manufacturers that have come and went, right? We've seen that. And we even saw the headline, Lion Electric is going to get saved by an investor group in Quebec. But if you own a Lion Electric in North America, at least in the United States, it looks like that still doesn't save you. They're only really looking to salvage the business in Quebec alone, which is interesting, right, Ryan?
They have a lot of money that was invested by the Quebec government and the utility there. So I can see where they're trying to basically recoup a lot of those costs and say, okay, a lot of this company's been funded by Quebec, so we're going to keep these electric school buses for Quebec and not have to obviously provide service all across North America when they're, we're hemorrhaging money and they owed almost $250 million. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think also with Quebec specifically, with Lion, there were a lot of government mandates that people had to buy Lion because it was made there. And I'm not sure if those almost monopolistic regulations are going to remain in place now with the situation, right? Because if you've had to fire your whole workforce, that means you got to hire your workforce back. You've obviously violated the trust of your workforce. I don't know if I would be motivated to go back to a company that fired me, that went bankrupt, that's got all this kind of turmoil internally. That would be scary as an employee to be in something so on shaky ground almost. And so I'll be curious to see if that doesn't affect the quality of the product, the engineering. What does that exactly mean? How's that going to play out? So it'll be very interesting to see how this thing unfolds. I thought it was toast. Really, I wasn't quite sure. I didn't think it was going to make it. Nothing indicated that it would. So clearly there's a last ditch effort by an investor group to kind of save Lion and see where it heads. So time will tell, I guess. I keep saying that over and over, but it feels like that is just the story of this one. It is just keeps chugging away.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think a lot of people figured it would get auctioned off for parts. But that group led by the real estate investor, Vincent Chiara up there, like you said, they're going to be the new owners apparently. So we'll have to see what's next from Lion Bus.
All right, Ryan, whatever top headlines are happening out there in school transportation.
Well, we wrote about this back in April, but Illinois is looking to be the next state to require lap shoulder seat belts in new school buses. They actually, the legislature there advanced the bill, passed both House and the Senate end of May 21st. So Governor J.B. Pritzker has about 60 days to sign or veto, or at that point, if he does nothing, it'll just become law. It's seemingly gonna move on. I mean, it wasn't unanimous, but it was pretty close to it. It was definitely unanimous in the House. Only 7 senators voted against it. So it appears that Illinois will be the next state that will require those seatbelts. I know, Tony, you were taken aback when you found out that it's not till 2031 that this law will go into place. And from our reporting, we understand that was basically a compromise. I think the opponents were worried with the original language of 2028 that it was going to be too soon. So it went from January 1st, 2028 to January 1st, 2031. Anytime you're giving folks 5 years, that should be able to account for those with new purchases. Now, what's interesting with this is there's no requirement for use or for school bus drivers to ensure that students are buckling up. And, one of the things that I've learned in covering seatbelts and talking with a lot of states and a lot of school districts is without a usage policy, you have to have that teeth in it. So certainly I think that school districts could have their own requirements, but definitely the way that this legislation is written, it's trying to, I think, protect the school bus drivers and the school district. Anytime you have lap shoulder belts, among one of the many challenges or basically things that folks are afraid of is putting that liability on the school bus driver and ensuring that amongst everything else that they're doing, that they then have to make sure the kids are buckled up and remaining buckled up. So, some of the districts I've spoken to have found ways around that. And certainly, just like anything, you're never going to fully get 100% compliance. Kids are always going to be, standing up or eating on the bus or something, right? And the same goes with lap shoulder belt usage. But it's been interesting to me that a lot of the success that some districts have had is they're utilizing their school bus cameras, for example, to monitor the kids that are wearing and that are not wearing. They will definitely have their school bus drivers at least not leave the school in the afternoon until everyone's buckled up. Now that doesn't mean some kids won't unbuckle, but I think the intent here is just to try to close that safety loop in terms of compartmentalization in those side impact crashes and rollovers where the kids are not protected by the high seat backs, those high cushion seat backs. So again, it'll be interesting to hear from Illinois school districts as we move forward what some of their plans are to meet this mandate. Again, they're going to have 5 years, so it's not facing them right in their wheelhouse like for the next school year or two. No funding for this as well, but the costs I know were a part of the conversations in this bill. Some a little bit high estimates. I saw I believe 7,000 to 18,000 more per bus. It's probably be more like 3,500 to 7,000, 8,000, maybe as high as 10,000 in some cases. But some of the school bus proponents have told me, hey, there's so many other things on the school bus, bells and whistles that are being added that cost more than this. So I know that there's still a movement afoot in Ohio to try to get lap shoulder belts there. There was some talk in some other states, so we'll keep our thumb on the pulse, Tony. But so if you're in Illinois, look for more information on that law.
Yeah, it does boggle my mind a little bit that it gets stretched out that long from a safety perspective. I mean, we've obviously talked to different proponents of safety technologies. Jeff Castle, the school bus safety company, being one. He's got a new program out that I was able to demo, start looking at it, safety leadership. It's good stuff. And I think when you look at technology versus training, training's super important with people. and being able to elevate your safety norms, looking at those certain things, looking at behaviors, and how do you as a leader elevate the training within your organization. Technology is there to help us in case, I almost call it like insurance, right? Nobody wants to have an accident. You don't intentionally have an accident, but you can't control all the behaviors. You do your best to kind of train your people up on the best behaviors and try to get that out there. And we've seen horrific accidents, obviously, where seatbelts have saved lives. And, when your passenger car, it's like commonplace to think of a passenger car without a seatbelt. It's like, that doesn't exist. Back in the day, I don't know, when people used to throw their kids in the back of the station wagon and there were no belts, then that was it.
Pre-1986, so at least when there was lap belts. But yeah, I remember growing up as a kid, when I was a young kid, and I mean, my mom still tells me stories about bringing me home from the hospital, and she was sitting in the front seat and I was in her arms. And there's no way that would happen now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's like you get thrown in jail for something like that. So it becomes this situation where children are conditioned already to wear their seatbelt in a passenger car, or if they're, and more in the younger state, even my little one who I put in a booster seat, she knows we can't drive off in the car until she's buckled. And that's how kids are conditioned these days. So I think when you talk about a usage policy, that's a district thing. But the reality is that children have a clear understanding of what buckling up means. Now, on a school bus, do they feel it necessary, or do they feel like they're safe inside a compartmentalized seat, right? If they've been conditioned that they've never had seatbelts, and now that they do, why do I have them? So it's this kind of reconditioning of children's behavior. So it'll be curious to see if this does go through. So what are the implications that it would look like, right? So I think that those are always the challenges that you see with new technology being introduced.
What's interesting to me, Tony, is, we have conferences our own 3 times a year, and then we're attending others. And if we happen to be going to an event and there's busing, there's someone's using a school bus 9 times out of 10. And in some of those states that have the seatbelt law, I've noticed, and even if we're using a motor coach and there's seatbelts, I look around at all the other attendees and see how many people put their seatbelts on. And I think maybe I've seen it once.
Oh yeah, on the ride and drives. Is that what you're talking about? I put it on, and someone's
or ride and drives, or being taken to dinner somewhere, or whatever.
That's crazy.
I look around, going to one like Topgolf, one of our parties, or any of these other events, and I look around and say, and granted, a lot of these folks are from non seatbelt states for school buses, and they don't believe in them. They don't think they need them because of the compartmentalization. But remember, compartmentalization is designed for the children. They're not designed for a bunch of adults. So I always find that interesting. And to your point, Tony, about children being conditioned, I know that if I ever start pulling out of our garage and I don't have my seatbelt on, my 4-year-old son says, "Daddy, you need to put your seatbelt on." So again, is it that children are viewing the school bus as safer, or is it an aspect that they're not with their parents and they view that as a different vehicle? That's not mom and dad's car, so they don't have to put the seatbelt on, especially if they're in a state that they've grown up and it doesn't have seatbelts. Well, now the kids in Illinois are going to have a different perspective on that. So yeah, it's interesting to me though, just to see how folks interact with seatbelts or not. And I even remember one time going out to NAPT out in South Carolina, many moons ago, and getting picked up at the airport. And I ended up, I think it was a shuttle or some kind of car, taxi maybe, and I ended up sharing it with about 4 other people. And one of the people said, "Well, I'm not putting my seatbelt on. I don't need it." And the driver was like, "Yeah, you don't need to wear your seatbelt." This wasn't that long ago. It was before COVID, but it's just interesting to me. And some of the conversations I still hear at trade shows talking about, the reasons not to have seatbelts, oftentimes not really grounded in a lot of accuracy. But again, Illinois poised to be, I think, about the 7th state with a lap shoulder belt requirement. There's a couple others that have lap belts and one that has a law but doesn't even enforce it. But again, if you want to read more, head over to stnonline.com.
Yeah, Ryan, I think the debate will rage on and it will continue as it goes, but we look forward to seeing everyone out at STN EXPO West in Reno, July 11th through the 16th. Love to continue the conversation with you guys, get your opinions on this topic. It's definitely a hot one that continues to rage on. The Great Seatbelt Debate, Ryan. I spent as long as I've been in the industry, it's been going on. So it continues to roll. We'll see what happens in Illinois real soon. So without further ado, Mr. Ryan Gray is going to be talking with Denise Donaldson. Before we get to our interview, we have a quick message. Hey, safety is a number one priority for everyone in school transportation, and even more so when needing to communicate in a school bus setting. School radios, push to talk over cellular or POC radios, are the safety enhancement you need to provide clear communication across all aspects of your fleet. Schools, SROs, that's school resource officers, and beyond. School radio helps take safety and connectivity a step further by offering interoperability solutions that bridge conventional two-way radios with POC systems, creating a unified network that boosts effectiveness and safety. This integrated strategy guarantees smooth communication in both emergency situations and daily activities. To learn more about how school radio can improve safety in your communication methods, visit school-radio.com. That's school-radio.com.
We want to welcome to the School Transportation Nation podcast stage a good friend of ours, a good friend of mine. I can't believe we haven't had her on before here in the 5+ years or so that we've been doing this. Denise Donaldson,
Hey.
editor and publisher of Safe Ride News, certified passenger safety technician instructor. So we already have to have that -I after CPST. A lot of you out there in the nation who have attended, especially TSD Conference, STN EXPO, any of the mini 8-hour NHTSA approved child passenger safety on school buses seminars. She's the lead on that. Denise, this huge, long-winded introduction, but you've done so much. Thank you so much for joining us finally.
I've done so much in a very niche area that I hope helps the folks listening, which is to have help for you in the area of using child safety restraint systems properly. So I love your podcast, by the way. I think that was brilliant to come up with that years ago. I'm glad it's continuing. So thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, it's it's a pleasure to have you on, and really one of my go-to people anytime that we're writing something or putting something on one of the conference agendas about child safety restraint systems. There's a lot to talk about there, and there's been a lot that's happening in current events that we can get into a little bit. But I always like to learn or help our nation learn more about our interview subject each week. So I gave you that long spiel at the top, but share with the nation who Denise Donaldson is. How did you get to become this expert in child safety restraint systems to begin with?
It was basically a situation where I saw a gap or a need, and decided that was the direction I needed to go. So in the 90s, I had a career in finance and had my children, and thought surely I would resume that career path after they were a little older. And what ended up happening was I was introduced to the world of car seats, and discovered that I wasn't alone in using car seats wrong. I'm happy to say I didn't learn the hard way by having a crash with my kids, but it was kind of scary and upsetting to learn that had I gotten into a crash in those early years, probably the outcomes would have been bad. So that sort of motivated me to learn more. And the more I learned, the more I needed to tell others about it. And it really snowballed from there. And what I didn't know in the 90s when I first started learning was that the federal government, NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, had also observed that this problem is across the country of misuse of car seats or lack of use. And so they were developing a certification program. So would hope that this that your audience even knows is when you say I'm a certified child passenger safety technician instructor, what that even means, because that really is something that people in this industry really should understand. People in the field should understand that the federal government trains people like myself. There's over 40,000 of us across the country who are here to help you with a lot of free services. So would it make sense to explain that program a little bit?
Well, absolutely, because I think that a lot of folks, when you have kids, you don't think about this, like as you were mentioning, and you all of a sudden you're told, hey, you need to have a car seat. You're not allowed anymore to leave the hospital without a car seat, and they're actually checking to make sure it's in there and it's secure. And a lot of states, I know here in California, when I had my first child, I went to the California Highway Patrol. And they basically said, yeah, I was kind of like freaked out because I'd been involved with TSD and been going and knew about the 8 hours. So I was really kind of like all over it and going, okay, I'm kind of overthinking it probably. But I went to CHP and I think it took like 5 minutes. And they're like, okay, you're good to go. And I'm like, all right, that was easy. But yeah, explain what the certified child passenger safety technician program is. And I think part of that too is there's two elements of it, really, right? You have the 32-hour training, which is for securing kids in all different kinds of passenger vehicles, essentially. But then you have this 8-hour add-on for school bus.
Yeah, so think of the 32-hour course we have. We kind of call it the 32-hour course as kind of the foundational course to be it's an actual certification course. It's standardized and developed through a Child Passenger Safety Board with funding from NHTSA. And it has been around for over about 25 years now. We've had this certification course so that people across the country have a standardized and scientific background on what they're training people to do. And so it's consistent in all different areas of the country. So if you go to someone who's been trained with this, and by the way, you can't just get trained and then be one forever. You have to be recertified every 2 years. So people are keeping their skills up to date. They're getting experience through continuing education units and practice in the field. And if you talk to somebody that has been trained in this way and has this certification, then they have that basic foundational training. And then what you're describing and what we teach as that 8-hour course, the NHTSA course, you'd call it at your conferences, is an additional enrichment training that can be tacked on for those who are interested in assisting caregivers or for people using school buses and transporting preschoolers and kids with disabilities on school buses who would need child safety restraint systems. So one thing just to point out too is a lot of times people call us car seat technicians or, car seat technician instructor. And really what we are is child passenger safety technician instructor. And I really, getting touchy about wording, it really matters to me that we are child passenger safety. So it's not about the car seat, it's about the child and whatever vehicle they're in, making sure that they are riding in the safest way possible. And many times in school transportation, that's through compartmentalization or using a seatbelt on a bus. But other times, and NHTSA has proven this through testing, if they're too small or they have a certain disability, they would need to have a child safety restraint system. And that can be trickier on a school bus than even in a car. And some of us have a hard time in their regular car, but on a school bus, that takes specific skills. And so learning those skills is really important because sometimes this is some of the major times of the day that kids are riding in those vehicles. Some of these kids, that is the main time they're out in a vehicle is on the bus. So just knowing how to use it in a car isn't as important as maybe knowing how to get them to school and back safely.
And you touched on the importance. And so we're really talking about those, everything from the infant and toddler, preschool age, transitional kindergarten is huge. I was actually just looking at a press release here in California from the California Department of Education. They're talking about that some of the enrollment declines they had been seeing are starting to even out, and they reference traditional kindergarten. I have a son who is in transitional kindergarten or soon will be. But also, too, I think, it's important to know that the child safety restraint systems, CSRS, or as NHTSA calls it, CRS, and it's kind of, the acronym soup. But those CSRS in school buses aside from those car seats, you're not going to see those in cars or trucks.
You absolutely can't, right? So what we would consider as CSRS, or child safety restraint system. So we got to get that word safety in there when we're talking about restraining kids in student transportation. We know that. So we really carefully say CSRS, or child safety restraint system. The full scope of all of those includes what we call car seats, the same kind of conventional seats we would use. Those could be used on a school bus if you have the right anchorages and the right spaces and things like that. But there's that whole other type that's attached using a camera or a seat back mount, it might be called. And those are specifically just for school buses.
Okay. Great. So a lot here that's swimming around in your head, and I don't know how you keep it all straight, but I mean, you're like the encyclopedia. And so let's talk about how you got involved with Safe Ride News. So I think it was about 2007 or so, and I believe we met around that same time, because I think you came to a TSD conference with the previous person and you were introduced to say, hey, this is the heir apparent.
Yes, absolutely. Good memory. So I was just very fortunate. So the child passenger safety field and the car seat industry and all of that, we have to also remember this is also a kind of a movement that started in the 80s and 90s. So it's been a public safety movement that's involves the school bus, but also the passenger vehicle. And all of this has been a really huge success. And it continues to be a movement going forward. Well, some of those early pioneers included the person who started Safe Ride News as a newsletter initially, Deborah Davis Stewart. So to my great fortune was she lived in an area, I live in the Northwest, and she lives around here as well. And so I had gotten to meet her in the 90s. And so when she was thinking about retirement, I was someone that she thought of to ask if I would be interested. And I think I picked up the phone, as you said, in 2007, and she offered me the idea. And I said, well, I'll have to check with my family, but yes, I will absolutely do this. And so shortly thereafter, I was getting to dig a little deeper and also become a little broader in my child passenger safety work. And right away knew that student transportation was an area that really the CPST world and that student transportation world really should find synergies they can by coming together more often than they currently do. So that is always one of my aims, is to encourage people on the side of the child passenger safety technician to help with the school bus area, and have people in student transportation remember to reach out to us as well, because we can actually provide a lot of help in using these things right. And not only that, using them easier. A lot of times we can come up with ways that make it easier to use things right because we're familiar with the products. So if you're struggling, contact a child passenger safety technician. We might be able to help.
Great. And I know one of the big elements of outreach that we try to do is reach out to those folks, because as you mentioned earlier, there is that 32-hour element that I think most certified passenger safety technicians, they look at that and, okay, I'm that, but they don't necessarily go and do that additional 8-hour add-on. And that leaves a vacuum in the industry. And that's why training like the child passenger safety on school buses, the NHTSA approved course that we talk about, is so important, because we need to make sure that folks out there in school districts know how to do this, and where do they go to get the training if their local CPST doesn't have that 8-hour add-on.
Right. And, and so there's the average tech who gets the 8-hour add-on, and there's also folks who are deep into student transportation who become CPSTs and maybe take the additional enrichment course as well, who are really the very important people out there who are really helping improve proper usage out there.
Now, this 8-hour add-on, the NHTSA class, quote unquote, that we call it, it was revised recently. So I think around 2023 is when it came out, but it had been going on for a while. You were heavily involved with that. Can you share a little bit more the nuance behind why that was necessary and what that looks like?
Well, just like anything else, over time things change, and also it improves the even besides just the products and the policies we want to talk about. So the content of we could also improve the the delivery, just the technology for delivering a quality, modern looking presentation that's engaging to adult learners. And so we had the opportunity, like you say, a few years ago to do a revision that was pretty much a major revision. And, kudos to the folks from back 20 years ago who've updated that. It had been updated other times, most recently 2015 prior to this most recent one. And we've been lucky to have Sue Schutramp involved in all the versions. So that's been some continuity. But there's been so many folks that have, Charlie Kennington was involved in all the other ones. And a lot of folks that our listeners probably remember Charlie. And his birthday's today, by the way. Happy birthday,
happy
Charlie.
birthday, Charlie, out there in Texas, West Texas. Yeah, I'll have to send him a note.
So, it's something that really will need to be looked at really every 5 years just to make sure it stays up to date. Because obviously we want to be, if we're giving standardized training, we have to give it with the most current and accurate information. So.
Gotcha. And then, I mentioned earlier that child safety restraint systems, I think they should always be in the news cycle when we're talking about the school bus world, but it's especially of note recently in terms of the really rise in vans or other vehicles that we've seen recently. It was a historic section actually that came out of the National Congress on School Transportation last month in Des Moines, Iowa. I know you were there. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it, but I was kind of trying to follow along blow by blow remotely. But with that, they have, for the first time, the group looked at a non-yellow school bus issue. It had always been about, the national school transportation specifications and procedures. So if you all have it out there, it's a couple inches thick book that has basically recommendations that a lot of states use either part and parcel as a regulation or as a law of how their school transportation operations need to run, and inspection and maintenance and vehicle specs and all that stuff. But, adding this alternative transportation element, very important, because again, we're no longer talking about that traditional, we're looking at that 8-hour NHTSA class school buses.
That's specifically about a school bus environment, right?
Now we have these other vehicles. We're seeing, there's been a rise in these third-party contractors. Some of the traditional school bus contractors are now offering this service. We're also seeing a lot of school districts purchasing vans or sedans. It used to be before it would be like more for coaches or maybe for like the tennis team or something.
Yeah. It would maybe sometimes pop up, but it wasn't as mainstream and as broad. And, we have contracted third parties as well who are using them. So, yeah, it was great as you're saying, at the NCST meeting, which just happened last month. And yeah, the book is a couple inches thick, but also make sure people understand they can get this. They can look at it as a PDF online when it gets posted. So 2025 coming soon. I think it'll hopefully be at the end of the summer available. So yeah, super exciting that a new section is on just about alternative vehicles. That was great. One of the things for preschoolers and kids, with disabilities and child safety restraint systems that we made sure that section had was noting that while school buses are usually as a vehicle exempt from most child occupant protection laws for each of the states, that does not exempt a student transporter for all their vehicles, just their school buses. So that is a reminder that's in that section. But I also, I was there because I was the writing committee chair for the infants, toddlers, and preschoolers section of the NCST meeting. And our committee, we had 8 folks that worked for the last few years getting that put together. And one of our main objectives was to make sure that that section also addresses for specific needs of the younger kids any kind of non-school bus vehicle. So that is one big update to that section, so that those who are considering taking preschoolers or kids with disabilities in those kind of vehicles, what do I need to expect for using, getting the kids on the bus, getting the kids off the bus, and using child safety restraint systems?
We often talk about the need for the student transporters, the attendants, the school bus drivers, and we'll get into the attendants in a second because there was an element of that at NCST. But how much also needs to be discussed in terms of communicating to the parents because I see news articles all the time, about, and unfortunately we've seen over the last several years far too many, which is basically any more than one, incidences of children on school buses that are being secured improperly by an aide / attendant / monitor, or maybe a school bus driver. There was actually a case recently up in New Jersey that we reported about, that the attendant was, this video of the attendant on ear pods on the phone. The student who is in her care is in a wheelchair behind her. And actually, the defense attorney tried to blame the parents, because the parent,
14-year-old sibling, it was tragic. Yeah.
So, I mean, how much of this also too is engaging the parents so that they know that this resource is available, and even from a standpoint of, so they know, so they're asking for it, so they're going to the school district. Shouldn't that, when you're discussing the IEP, the individualized education program, that's always such a big conversation at TSD out in Frisco, Texas. And like I mentioned, Denise, you're such a huge part of that conference for us. But, how much of those discussions have to be, or the parents need to be aware of, so that they're asking, hey, how's my child being secured on the school bus? Or what about this other vehicle, if it's a school district van, or we're using one of these third-party contractors?
Yeah. I mean, owning a niche publishing company, ever since I left finance, I would say I've been focusing on communication, right? So, of course, communication is important, and you definitely need to bring, especially for children with an IEP or an IFSP, the parent, the caregiver should be aware of what's going on. But of course, they're not getting on the bus and installing the seat. And we would really recommend that the district or the contractors, whoever's providing the transportation, should be it's ideal for them to provide the child safety restraint system, because then its background, how it's taken care of, how to adjust it, it's a safe seat to use. So, there's that. Yes, absolutely. Having caregivers be educated, that's part of another hat I wear. I want them to also be educated, and they can be much better participants in the IEP process if they are knowledgeable, but they're not the ones ultimately responsible for installing. But I'll give you an example in the New Jersey case you described. Like every other human being that watched that video, are enraged that this person who was supposed to be watching this child, while she kind of bounced lower and lower and ultimately was strangled by her positional harness. But people didn't exactly, while they noted that the child wasn't being watched, which was the last part of the safe system that failed. That was, of course, that last, but there were a bunch of other things that could have happened between there that could have also protected that child, including, if you notice, she didn't have the occupant protection system of the WTORs. The wheelchair probably was tied down, but she was not wearing the seatbelt portion of it. And that is, she was instead just relying on that positional harness. So that was a mistake to begin with. But even more so, this was a very small child, lightweight. The safest thing for a child who uses a wheelchair during the day is to actually transfer to a approved child safety restraint system on the school bus. So had they considered that? I don't know. I don't think that the IEP meetings usually address this point. The American Academy of Pediatrics makes it really clear that is the safest thing when feasible. If the people on the bus can lift the child and the child is, characteristics are not going to prohibit it, the best thing is to secure the wheelchair, put the child in a child safety restraint system. So, the safe system broke down in many points, in that it ultimately led to the worst possible situation.
That's a great point. And that's something we talk about often at TSD, because again, when you mentioned it earlier, the emphasis should be on the child.
Yeah.
And if this is a child or a student with a disability, it's not a special needs child. It's not a disabled child. It's a student with a disability or a condition, a medical issue or a health challenge. But the whole reason for having IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is to be transitioning these kids, helping them learn life skills and not ostracizing them. So, I mean, oftentimes I've thought, and I know some people, consider this, and I know it's a mechanical or engineering issue, but we have the wheelchair door at the back of the bus, and there's a connotation to the back of the bus, and it just, but a lot of the discussions that we have at TSD, and again, Denise, you're leading a lot of these, so that's why everybody, you should go to tsdconference.com and register. But before I let you go, Denise, there also is recently in the news talking about child safety restraint systems. NHTSA, they have NPRM, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, on FMVSS, Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards. I always have to feel like I define the acronym so people know what I'm talking about, but 213. And this has actually been updated already, and it's set to go into effect here at the end of this month, June 30th. But there's an NPRM that NHTSA basically was responding to a petition to. Can you share with our readers a little bit about that? What do they need to know about that?
So the interesting thing is this has gotten a lot of attention. This came out on Friday, and it was kind of a last minute notification to the public that NHTSA does intend to clean up do some housekeeping on some of the standards around child passenger safety and car seats that need to happen so that we continue to have viable school bus only type of seats. So STAR seats, Bessie ProTech, HSM, portable child restraint. Those types of seats, in the current way that the standard is written and set to go into effect on June 30th, would be required to meet the side impact standard. And you kind of alluded to this earlier in our talk. Those seats are not really, any kind of car seat that's going to meet that standard relies heavily on the big plastic shell that goes around the child in order to pass that standard. And of course, that's exactly what we're moving away from by using a seat that's made specifically for a school bus that is much smaller, doesn't have that big bulky shell, installs using a cam wrap. And so, and you might say, well, gosh, maybe that's not safe on a bus for those kids not to have that. But remember, school buses are very highly regulated vehicles, and they have side impact standards that are much more extreme than for regular vehicles. And so the children are benefiting from that. They don't need that, they sometimes need the shell of a car seat for positioning, for proper recline or support of their torso. So that's one reason that they might be specified, say in an IEP, for instance. But for a lot of kiddos, getting one of those seats that are school bus only ones, I just mentioned those models, those is going to be much more likely to fit well into the bus, easier to install in all types of buses, even if there aren't seat belts for installation and things like that. So, and really, NHTSA didn't have any intention of holding those products to that standard from the start. Initially, back in 2023, when they did an update to FMVSS 213 to make an upcoming, in December, there's an upcoming update to that. They, at that time, created this new category for school bus only seats. So school bus child safety restraints. Child restraint systems, like you said, child restraint systems. So there's now a new category, which is great because that means that people who create those kinds of products, either the people who are currently doing it or even new companies that want to do it, aren't so restricted to that former harness category, which really kind of limited the ability to do things kind of creatively. So now we have this new category. So that is excellent, but they kind of forgot to do some housekeeping to take away the requirement, for instance, that there be a latch system on that seat. We don't want that. We're just going to install using a cam wrap. We don't need a latch system. That would be inappropriate. We shouldn't have to meet the side impact standard because that's not needed on the school bus like it is in a regular vehicle. So really, I view these updates with respect to child safety restraint systems as housekeeping that NHTSA just needed to fix up, and they knew they needed to get it done. And the only unfortunate thing is it happened 30 days prior to the deadline for meeting the side impact standard. And because it's initiating new rulemaking, because it's a proposal, that they have to wait for a 30-day comment period. which I love, by the way. I love the comment period. It is my favorite thing because in this whole boring rulemaking thing, I mean, if you think about it, it's so awesome that we have this democratic process where, and this isn't true in other countries. This is not true in Europe. It's not true in Canada. We have a system where if they come up with an idea, they have to put out this proposal like they just did on Friday. And then we as the public get a chance to put our 2 cents in there. And they have to respond to that. And so it's very, and they don't always say, yeah, great idea, but they have to respond to it. And so, while Emmy and Bessie may want to respond to these proposals, in this case, we know that they're trying to get this resolved so that those products are going to meet the standards properly and we can continue on using them and having them made. So I think that we should wait and watch. June 30th is going to be a big deadline because that's when the side impact rule would go into effect. I think NHTSA is going to come up with a way to make the products that we need in this industry continue to be viable prior to that time. So I'm confident.
Okay, and any of you folks that want to get super wonky, if you want to check that out, it's docket number NHTSA, so NHTSA-2025-0046. It's on the Federal Register, regulations.gov. You can find it. You can comment if you so will. But yeah, thanks again, Denise. Like I said, you're an encyclopedia, wealth of knowledge for this stuff. Oh, yes, you have something to add.
Can I add one more thing before if we're wrapping up? I just want to make sure I mention, because we talked about the NCST and the new standards and procedures document that's coming out. As we close, I want to make sure people know that we've really updated the appendix for the infants, toddlers, and preschoolers section so that all this stuff I've been talking about today, like how to become a child passenger safety technician, how do I take the enrichment course, where do I find car seats? How do I find discounted car seats? Things like that. That's all in a brand new appendix that will, I hope, I don't really want to be an encyclopedia. I want to get this information out to those who need it. So please utilize that appendix because that's going to really help everybody with finding, using, sourcing, purchasing of the products that they need.
That's her telling you nation that Ryan stopped calling and emailing me. Look at the appendix. But we're going to have Rhonda Weber, executive director for NASDIPS, which oversees and puts together NCSD. She's going to be out in Reno to give a kind of high overview of what happened. But Denise, you're also going to be in Reno. Of course, we were talking about NHTSA, the 8-hour, but also you're going to be doing a session. You want to just kind of tickle folks a little quickly about what that's going to be?
Sure. Well, besides doing the 8-hour course, which we will do that's on Friday. And then on Sunday, I have a session that thank you for letting me do. As we went through that whole NCST process, I noted there's about 10 big problem areas where I think there's huge amount of misunderstanding in the field. And I think I mentioned a few of them, alluded to a few of them even in this podcast, but there's some others that I came up with a top 10 occupant protection issues and why they're, they might surprise people, audience members may be surprised at some of these kind of revelations that are ongoing problems for safety of kids, especially preschoolers and kids with disabilities.
STNEXPO.com/West is where you can register. So you can check out what those top 10 are from Denise as well as everything else. So Denise, again, thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you in person here in Reno in like a month.
Yeah.
I think just about. And again, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Sorry it took again so long to have you on here, but I'm thinking, oh my gosh, hey, perfect timing. So thanks again.
All right. Thanks a bunch.
A special thanks to Denise Donaldson for coming on, sharing her thoughts. Mr. Ryan Gray, always appreciate your perspectives and insights on everything happening in the school transportation industry. Also, special thanks to our sponsors. We really appreciate TransFinder and School Radio for supporting this episode of the podcast. Make sure and tell them you heard about them on the STN podcast. Love that they're a sponsor and helping you guys get the great information we provide every week. Hey, visit stnonline.com for all the latest news and analysis on the school transportation industry. And don't forget STN EXPO West, July 11th through the 16th. There's still time to register, lock in your room, get a spot for some of the best content and training in the school transportation industry. So we got you guys covered in Reno this summer. We hope you make it a great one, Nation. Don't forget, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. Every week, we've got you covered. Nation, we love you. We'll see you next week.